Here's something most people never learn until it's too late. The County Register of Deeds doesn't check whether a document is true. They check whether the margins are right, whether the fee is paid, whether the notary block is filled in. Then they stamp it, scan it, and file it forever. You can record a lie in America for $34. Getting the lie recorded is easy. Keeping it recorded, that's where people get caught. I know this because I spent 29 years as a United States postal inspector. And the man who tried to steal my Marina apparently never met one. My name is Frankie Doyle. I'm 66 years old, and I live in Coble Bay, Michigan, a harbor town so small the diner and the bait shop share a wall and, some winters, a heater. For almost 3 decades I chased mail fraud across the Midwest, fake sweepstakes, phony charities, romance cons that emptied retirement accounts one greeting card at a time. I retired with a pension, a bad left knee, and a promise to my daughter that I'd stop treating everyone I met like a suspect. I meant that promise when I made it. The Marina came from my husband, Gene. He built Doyle's Landing out of a collapsed cannery dock in 1979, one piling at a time, and ran it until his heart quit on him in the parking lot 6 years ago, 40 feet from the fuel pumps he'd installed himself. He left me the slips, the boat storage yard up the hill, the workshop, and a filing habit I teased him about for 40 years and thanked him for at his funeral. Gene kept everything, every receipt, every permit, every scrap of paper with a dollar sign on it, sorted into steel cabinets in the back office. Turns out I married a man who ran his own evidence room. I just didn't know yet how much I'd need it. My daughter Lauren is 33. She works nights as an ICU nurse over in Traverse City, and for a lot of years she and I were more polite than close. I missed things when she was young, recitals, a broken wrist. One Christmas Eve I spent in a surveillance van outside a check cashing store in Toledo. We'd been slowly stitching that up, dinner by dinner, and I was careful with it. Careful the way you are with something you already dropped once. Then came Kyle Merritt, 38, investment consultant, the kind of handshake that makes you feel like the most interesting person at the party. He married my daughter last October after 5 months of dating, and here's the part one want to be honest about, I liked him. He fixed my dock lights without being asked. He remembered that I take my coffee black. He laughed at Gene's old stories like he'd known him. Only one thing ever snagged in my mind, and I dismissed it, because I'd made a promise. One Sunday I caught him in the back office with his phone out, taking pictures of the papers on my desk. He grinned and said he was a nerd about old business records, that the Marina's history would make a great website someday. I filed it away in the drawer where retired investigators put things they're not allowed to think about anymore. The envelope came on a Tuesday in April. I sort the Marina's mail every morning at the front counter, old habit, coffee on the left, letter opener on the right, junk in one pile, money in another. Mostly it's dock fees and marine supply catalogs. But that morning, tucked between a propeller flyer and the water bill, sat a county tax reassessment notice. Standard form, standard blue ink. Except for the name in the address window. Doyle Bay Holdings, LLC. I stood there reading it 3 times. I have never formed an LLC in my life. Gene never did either. The man barely trusted checking accounts. And yet there it was, in that flat government typeface that doesn't care how your stomach feels, a reassessment notice for my own parcel, addressed to a company I had never heard of, delivered to my own counter. I didn't call the county. I didn't call Lauren. I didn't call anybody. 29 years teaches you that the first phone call you make is the first phone call somebody can lie to you about later. I ran fuel dockside all day with that envelope folded in my jacket pocket like a stone. At 11 that night I sat down at Gene's old desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the county's online land records. Typed in my own parcel number, the one I pay taxes on every year. The index came back, and the newest entry sat at the top of the screen. A quitclaim deed, recorded 5 weeks ago. Grantor, Francis M. Doyle. Grantee, Doyle Bay Holdings, LLC. I clicked the scanned image and waited for it to load, telling myself it was a clerical mix-up, a wrong parcel number, somebody's paperwork error. The document opened, and there, at the bottom of the page, above a notary seal I'd never sat in front of, was my own signature, my slant, my loop, the little hook I put on the D, signing away everything Gene ever built. Except I never signed it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Gene's chair until the ice maker quit cycling and the lake went that dead kind of quiet it gets before dawn, and I made myself follow the rule that kept me employed for 29 years. Verify before you accuse. A signature on a screen is a scan, and scans lie. I needed the original record, and I needed a witness to the record who wasn't me. The Register of Deeds office sits in the county building behind a door with a pebbled glass window, and behind that door sits Bev Kowalski, who has stamped every document in this county since the Carter administration and remembers most of them by grudge. Bev and I go back to a pension fraud case in the 90s where her filing memory broke a con man's alibi. When I slid the parcel number across her counter the next morning and asked for the full recorded instrument, she didn't ask why. She just looked at my face, then at the name on the deed, and said, quietly, that she'd pull the book herself. The deed was real, not true, real, properly formatted, properly stamped, fee paid in cash, recorded on a Thursday afternoon 5 weeks back. Quitclaim from Francis M. Doyle to Doyle Bay Holdings, LLC, for the consideration of $1. $1. 46 years of Jean's life, transferred for the price of a gas station coffee. The notary block named a mobile notary out of Alden, a woman who drives to hospitals and nursing homes to witness signatures for people who can't travel. Bev photocopied everything twice, once for the file and once, she said, for whatever I was about to do about it. Then she leaned over the counter and said the thing that told me she already understood. In 31 years, she said, she'd learned that when a family property moves for $1, somebody in that family is about to have the worst year of their life. I found the notary that afternoon. She was polite, professional, and completely cooperative, because as far as she knew she'd done nothing wrong. Her logbook showed the appointment plain as day. A house call, 5 weeks ago, booked by phone, for an elderly woman named Frances Doyle who was described to her as recovering from hip surgery and unable to leave home. The address wasn't mine. The signature in her book had my slant and my loop and my little hook on the D. The woman who'd signed it had shown a Michigan driver's license with my name on it. The notary remembered her as gray-haired, soft-spoken, maybe mid-60s, with a nephew who hovered nearby handling the paperwork and cracking jokes. A nephew, helpful, charming, good with paperwork. I sat in my truck in her driveway afterward and photographed every page she'd let me copy, bracing the documents against the steering wheel the way I did for 3 decades in parking lots outside mail drops and shell offices. My hands knew the job before my head admitted I was back on it. Then I called Sal Ortiz. Sal worked mail fraud cases with me for 11 years out of the Detroit division, retired to a fishing cabin 40 minutes south, and still answers his phone like there's a duty agent on the other end. I laid it all out for him. The tax notice, the deed, the $1, the hired grandmother with the fake license. He was silent for a moment, and then he said the words I'd been avoiding since 11 o'clock the night before. Frankie, you know exactly who booked that appointment. I did, and Sal knew me well enough to say the next part fast, before I could hang up and drive to my daughter's house. If I knocked on that door tonight, he said, here's what I'd get. Kyle plays confused. The paperwork disappears. The LLC dissolves. Lauren has to choose between her husband and her mother with no proof on the table, and a forgery case turns into a family argument nobody can prosecute. You taught me that, he said. Fraud doesn't die when you confront it. It dies when you document it. So I made the choice that cost me more than anything else in this story. I went home, opened a fresh folder, wrote the date on the tab, and let the crime keep breathing. That Sunday I sat at Lauren's dining table and passed Kyle the potatoes. He was in a good mood, expansive, telling us about a development opportunity he was putting together, something that could really set this family up. He winked at me when he said it. I smiled back and asked if he wanted more chicken. My daughter squeezed his hand, proud of him, and I sat there performing the role of the retired mother who checks nothing, while the folder in my office got heavier in my mind with every course. Sal called back Wednesday night. He traced Doyle Bay Holdings through the state filing system. The registered agent's address was a mailbox rental store 2 towns over, suite number 141, which is a fancy way of saying box 141. But it was the second name on the organizing documents that made him slow down and spell it out for me. The attorney of record, Dana Pruitt. Neither of us had ever heard of her. By the following week, I'd wish it had stayed that way. Dana Pruitt turned out to be a name with almost no shadow behind it. No office address, no bar listing Sal could confirm on the first pass, just a phone number on the LLC filing and a signature block that said attorney at law like the words alone made it true. Sal kept digging. I kept watching. And what I watched, mostly, was Kyle getting busy. It started with little things. He was suddenly taking day trips downstate for meetings he described with a wave of his hand. He upgraded his phone. He started using words like entitlements and density study at family dinners, trying them on the way some men try on watches. Then one of my longtime slip renters, a commercial realtor named Chuck Braddock, mentioned over a fuel up that he'd heard something odd at a broker mixer in Traverse City. Somebody, Chuck said, was quietly shopping lake frontage in Coble Bay to Lakecrest Resorts. The outfit that had turned 2 other small harbors into condo villages with paddleboard rental kiosks where the bait shops used to be. Chuck laughed about it. Whoever it is, he said, they're telling Lakecrest the seller is motivated. The seller, of my Marina, was motivated. I want to be honest about what that stretch of weeks cost, because the paperwork was never the hard part. The hard part was my daughter. I tried, once, to open a door without opening the whole wall. Lauren and I were walking the dock at dusk on one of her rare nights off. Gulls working the water, and I asked, as gently as I know how, which I'll admit isn't very, how well she really knew Kyle's business. Whether she'd ever actually seen his accounts. Whether the condo project he talked about ever had an address. She stopped walking, and I watched 15 years of old damage surface in about 4 seconds. There it is, she said. She wasn't yelling. It was worse than yelling. You promised me, Mom. You said when you turned in the badge, you'd stop running background checks on everyone I love. You did it to my prom date. You did it to my college roommate's father. You missed half my childhood chasing liars, and now that somebody finally makes me happy, you can't stand not investigating him. Every word landed because most of them were fair. I had missed things. I had run her prom date's plates. And standing there on Jean's dock, holding evidence that would burn her marriage to the waterline, I made the coldest calculation of my life. If I told her right then, with the file only half built, she'd confront Kyle inside the hour. She's my daughter, she doesn't sit on things, and the whole case would evaporate. So I apologized. I told my child she was right about me. I let her walk to her car believing her mother was the problem, and then I stood on that dock until the lights came on across the bay, hating how good I am at holding a cover. The near miss came 2 Sundays later. Dinner at their place. Lauren was pulling a roast. Kyle stepped out to the deck to take a call. And I did the thing retired inspectors are absolutely not supposed to do in their son-in-law's house. The office door was open. His desk was a mess of folders, and sitting right on top was a preliminary site sketch. My shoreline, my slips, redrawn with buildings that don't exist and a label across the water in confident gray letters. I had my phone out, one photo taken, when I heard the deck door slide. I was studying the bookshelf when he came around the corner. He stood in the doorway a beat too long. Lose your way, Frankie? Smiling when he said it, but the smile arrived late. I told him I was hunting for a bathroom and complimented a golf trophy. He watched me pass him in the hallway, and for the first time, I felt him filing something away about me. But it was the phone call that told me what was really driving him. From the driveway that night, keys in my hand, I could hear him around the corner of the garage, voice pitched low and stripped of every ounce of charm. I heard him say he needed 60 more days. I heard him say the word default. I heard him tell whoever was on the other end that the money was coming, that the deal was real, that he just needed the buyer to move faster. I watched his reflection in my truck window while he talked, shoulders tight, free hand pressed flat against the garage wall like the building might get away from him. That's when Kyle Merritt finally made sense to me. He wasn't stealing for yachts. He was drowning, and my family's Marina was the piece of driftwood he'd decided he was entitled to. Sal and I shifted into a rhythm I knew from 100 old cases. I logged every mailing I could lawfully see, the envelopes from a Grand Rapids law firm arriving at their house, the certified slips Lauren mentioned signing for without a second thought. I mapped the LLC's mailbox store, noted the postmarks, built the timeline. Not to stop him yet. To understand the machine while it was still running. Then the machine sped up on its own. On a Thursday morning in June, a courier van pulled into my lot. And a kid in a red polo handed me a flat cardboard mailer, got a signature, and was gone before I read the label. Addressed to Doyle Bay Holdings, LLC, at the Marina Street address. Some assistant at some office had pulled the property address instead of the mailbox store, the kind of small clerical slip that has broken better criminals than Kyle. I stood at my counter and read a letter of intent from Lakecrest Resorts. Purchase of the parcel, contingencies, earnest money, survey language, and one line that turned the whole summer into a countdown. The parties anticipated closing within 21 days. 3 weeks, that's what I had left to take him down without him ever seeing it coming. Sal called it in 2 days before the 4th of July, and I could hear in his voice that he'd found the thing you hope you won't. Frankie, he said, I ran Dana Pruitt through every bar directory in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. She's not licensed anywhere. She's never been licensed anywhere. And when I pulled the history on her phone number, it connected to an old rental application in Sandusky, Ohio, filed under the name Dana Merck. Next to a co-applicant named Kyle Merck. Merck, not Merritt. It took Sal one more day to unspool the rest, working old contacts and public records the way he used to work a route of Dropboxes. 6 years ago, in a lake town outside Sandusky, a man named Kyle Merck spent 14 months courting and marrying a widow named Carol Ann Feeney, 30 years his senior in trust if not in age. She was 59. Lonely, and owned a paid-off cottage on the water. By the time the marriage dissolved, the cottage had passed through an LLC and been sold to a vacation rental company. Carol Ann's civil suit went nowhere. The county prosecutor called it a family dispute over property. No charges. Kyle Merck walked away, and somewhere between Ohio and Michigan he sanded 2 letters off his last name and became a man with no history at all. Sal emailed me a scan from a Sandusky weekly paper, a faded photo of Carol Ann standing at the end of her dock during the dispute. Arms folded, squinting into the sun at a cottage that legally wasn't hers anymore. I sat at Jean's desk looking at that woman for a long time. She'd trusted the paperwork because her husband handled the paperwork. That was the whole con. That was the whole crime. And the sister, the half-sister, Sal confirmed, same father, different mothers, had been beside him both times, printing letterhead, signing as counsel, dressing the fraud in a suit. So now I knew what I was actually dealing with. Not a desperate man who broke once. A team, a rehearsed play, being run for the second time, on my daughter. I spent that whole night trying to script the conversation. How do you tell your child that her husband's name isn't his name? I drafted it in my head a dozen ways, and every version ended with Lauren hating the messenger. I never got to use any of them. At 12:40 in the morning, headlights swept across my kitchen window. Lauren's car, parked crooked in the lot, driver's door left hanging open. She came up the walk still in her scrubs, straight off shift, holding a manila folder against her chest like it was bleeding. She didn't say hello. She walked past me into the kitchen, put the folder on the counter, and opened it. Mom, look at this and tell me I'm crazy. It was a home equity application on their house. The house her nursing salary carried, $60,000, already funded 2 months back. Both spouses' signatures on the consent page. Kyle's, confident and looping. And hers. I found it tonight looking for our insurance card in his desk, she said. Mom, I never signed this. I was on shift the day this was notarized. I pulled my own time card before I drove here. Then she took a pen from the cup by my phone, signed her name on the back of the folder, and laid it beside the forgery. Her hands were shaking so hard the second signature barely looked like the first. But it didn't matter, because the forged one was perfect. Perfect the way mine had been perfect. The same patient, practiced, studied hand. He signs my name better than I do, she said, and her voice cracked in half on the last word. I had a choice in that moment, and for once in my life I didn't take the controlled option. I told her everything, the tax notice, the deed, the dollar, the hired woman with the fake license, the LLC, the mailbox store, Lakecrest, the 21 days. And then the part that cost the most, that I'd known for almost 6 weeks, that I'd sat at her table passing potatoes to the man who did it. That the night she tore into me on the dock, I'd had the proof in a folder and chosen the case over her. She went white, then furious, and not at Kyle first. At me. You let me defend him, she said. You let me stand on that dock and apologize for you in my head. You watched me love him with evidence in your truck. She wasn't wrong, and I didn't argue. I told her the truth I'd learned over 29 years, that if she'd known, he'd have read it on her face in a day, and everything would have vanished, the LLC. The paperwork, the man himself. He'd done it before, he'd walked before. Then I showed her Carol Ann Feeney's photograph. I watched my daughter study that stranger on that dock, and I watched her fury find its true address. She stood at my counter for a long, silent minute, an ICU nurse doing what ICU nurses do, absorbing catastrophic information and reorganizing herself around it. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat and steady and frightening. What do you need me to do? Not, I'm leaving him. Not, let's call the police tonight. What do you need me to do? Jean's daughter, all the way through. So we built the hardest part of the plan right there before sunrise. Lauren would go home. She would kiss her husband good morning. She would play the tired, oblivious wife for as long as the case required, and she would keep her eyes open, the mail, the calendar, the names he mentioned. Two of us performing now, at every dinner, both of us smiling across the table at a man who had done this before and slept fine afterward. 4 days later, she called me from the hospital parking garage, voice low. "Mom, he just told me to keep the last Friday of the month clear for a celebration dinner." I checked his calendar. He moved the closing up. 9 days. We had 9 days. 9 days is not enough time to build a fraud case from scratch. Fortunately, I wasn't starting from scratch. I had 6 weeks of documentation, a forged deed, a forged refinance, a fake attorney, a prior victim in Ohio, and one thing most fraud victims never have: a former colleague who still gets his calls returned at the Detroit field office. Sal and I drove down on a Monday and laid the whole file on a conference table in front of 2 working postal inspectors and an assistant U.S. attorney young enough to be my grandson and sharp enough that I forgave him for it. They read for an hour. Then the prosecutor looked up and told us what I already knew he'd say. The forgery was a state crime, solid but slow, the kind of case a conman with a suitcase and a second name has outrun before. If we wanted charges that would actually hold Kyle Merck, federal charges, mail fraud, wire fraud, we needed him to use the mail or the wires to move his scheme forward, cleanly, provably, recently. An overt act, preferably several. In other words, we couldn't just catch him. We had to let him keep going, and make sure that every step he took left a postmark. So we built him a paper trail to walk down. The inspectors reached out to Lakecrest's general counsel, and I'll say this for that company. The moment they understood they'd been negotiating for stolen land, they cooperated completely, because the only thing a developer fears more than a dead deal is a fraudulent one. From that point on, every message Kyle received from Lakecrest's side was being written at a government keyboard. First came the defect letters, polite notes from the title company flagging small curable issues on the parcel. A missing signature acknowledgement, a survey question, each one requesting a response by certified mail. For the file, Kyle, who trusted paperwork the way drunks trust one more drink, answered every single one. I watched him through the post office window in Coble Bay one Tuesday morning, sliding his envelope across the counter, taking his little green and white receipt, tucking it in his jacket like a man collecting evidence for his own prosecution. Because that's exactly what he was doing. Every certified letter was a federal count with his fingerprints on it, and he stood in line to mail them. Then came the earnest money, a wired deposit into the LLC's account, real funds, tracked to the penny. The inspectors wanted to know if he'd touch it before closing. He touched it in 4 days. $1,900 to a Marina, the irony of that word, no, to a credit card company, and $800 to a boat payment. Wire fraud doesn't require you to steal the whole pot, just to dip a hand in. Meanwhile, I did my part at the kitchen table, steaming open my memories instead of envelopes. Drafting the forgery affidavit with a real attorney this time and preparing a lea pendens, a public notice that the parcel's title was under dispute. Filing it too early would light up every title search and warn him. So we timed it like a fuse, recorded quietly with Bev's help, indexed to surface the morning of the closing, when it would be too late for him to run and exactly early enough to make the sale legally impossible. Then, 6 days out, the whole thing nearly died. Dana caught it. Of course it was Dana, the careful one, the one who'd spent her whole life proofreading her brother's cons. One of our defect letters referenced a plaid book number in a format the county hadn't used since an office software change. A nothing detail, she noticed. Lauren called me from her bathroom with the fan running, whispering that Kyle had come home gray-faced, that Dana was on speaker saying the words too smooth and something's off and walk away, we've done it before. And my daughter, my exhausted, heartbroken daughter, walked into that living room and saved the case. She told me afterward what she did, her voice flat as lake ice. She sat on the arm of his chair, put her head on his shoulder, and complained about her mother. Said I'd been nosing around the Marina books again, paranoid as ever, probably about to blow the family up over nothing, and that she was so tired, and could they please just get this deal done and take that trip he'd promised. She gave him a wife who was an alibi, an asset, and an audience all at once. Kyle spent the next hour comforting her, and talking himself right back into the deal. His greed did the heavy lifting. She just held the door. She scrubbed her hands for 10 minutes afterward, she told me. Like post-op, there was one more moment from that week I won't forget. Lauren mentioned, carefully, that Kyle had asked her twice whether her mother had an attitude about him lately, asked it lightly, smiling, while watching her face the whole time. The charm was thinning. Underneath it was a man doing arithmetic on how much I knew. We were running out of runway at both ends. The closing was set for a Friday morning at a title office in a strip plaza outside Traverse City. Conference room, coffee carafe, wire instructions ready. A room the inspectors had walked twice and would be sitting in as staff and as Lakecrest's representative. My job that morning was the hardest assignment of my career: stay home. 29 years of needing to be in the room, and the last operation of my life required me to trust other people to close it. Sal laughed when I said that out loud. He said, "Frankie, you built the machine. Let it run." Friday morning, 9:51. Sal's text from the parking lot, silver SUV arriving. Through the title office's front glass, Kyle Merck, dressed for his payday, paused to check his reflection, straightened his tie, and smiled at himself. He was 9 minutes from a $1.4 million wire. He was 9 minutes from something. Anyway, Sal narrated it for me later, minute by minute, and I've replayed it so many times I feel like I was in that conference room instead of standing at my Marina counter pretending to reconcile fuel receipts with a phone in my hand. Kyle walked in at 9:54 wearing his payday smile. The title officer, real title company, government briefed, offered coffee. Dana arrived separately, briefcase and blazer, introducing herself as counsel for the seller, which was its own separate crime happening in real time. The man seated across the table, silver-haired, golf tan, introduced himself as Lakecrest's closing representative. His actual name is Inspector Dale Whitcomb, and he's been working mail fraud out of the Detroit division for 19 years. They walked through the paperwork slowly, the way closings crawl. Kyle signed the seller's affidavit, swearing under penalty of perjury that he had authority to convey the parcel. He initialed the wire instructions for the $1.4 million. And then Whitcomb slid one final document across the table and asked him, pleasantly, to confirm for the record that the earnest deposit had remained untouched in escrow, per the agreement. Kyle's pen stopped halfway through his signature. Just for a second, the first honest moment that man had produced in years, because he knew he'd spent $2,700 of that deposit, and now he had to decide whether to lie one more time. He lied one more time. He signed. Whitcomb capped his own pen, set it down, and said, "Mr. Merck, I'm a United States Postal Inspector. And I'd like to talk about the certified letters you've been mailing." Sal said Kyle's face did something he'd only seen twice in his career. The expression of a man rewinding months of memories at high speed, watching every envelope, every receipt, every signature turn from armor into evidence. He looked at the title officer. She looked back like a wall. He looked at the closing representative who wasn't a closing representative. He said, almost gently, "My name is Merritt." And Whitcomb said, "No, sir, it isn't." And Kyle stopped talking, which was the first smart legal decision of his life. Dana never made it back to her car. 2 inspectors met her on the sidewalk, and the briefcase she was carrying held letterhead for a law practice that had never existed, which prosecutors would later describe, with lawyerly restraint, as unhelpful to her situation. But the moment I asked Lauren about, the one I needed to hear from her own mouth, came in the lobby. She'd insisted on being there. The agents argued against it and lost. Because arguing with Lauren is like arguing with weather. As they walked Kyle out, hands cuffed in front, she stepped into his path. Not screaming, not crying, she held out a folded set of papers, and when he wouldn't take them, she laid them on top of his cuffed hands. "Annulment," she said. "Fraud in the inducement. It turns out you can't stay married to a man who never legally told you his name." And then, before they moved him along, she said the thing I'll be quoting for the rest of my life. "From now on, the only person who signs Lauren Doyle's name is Lauren Doyle." The aftermath moved the way these things actually move, not in one cinematic gavel bang, but in filings and phone calls across the rest of that summer. The quiet title action voided the forged deed. The judge's order used the word nullity, which I had framed, and I'm not ashamed of that. The federal charges stacked up: mail fraud for the certified letters, wire fraud for the deposit, aggravated identity theft for the licenses. The state added forgery. Sandusky reopened Carol Ann Feeney's case within a month. I called her myself to tell her, and we talked for 2 hours, and she cried, and honestly so did I. Dana was charged for the forgeries she'd notarized into existence and for 4 years of practicing law out of a briefcase and pure nerve. And then there was the discovery that made even the prosecutors laugh, the one Bev Kowalski spotted first because Bev spots everything. Kyle's forged quitclaim deed, the crown jewel of his whole scheme, contained the legal description for one parcel. The boat storage yard, The gravel lot up the hill with the pole barns and the winter shrink wrap racks. Because decades ago, Jean, my beautiful, paranoid, paperwork-hoarding husband, had split the property and moved the actual waterfront, the shoreline, the slips, the frontage Lake Crest was drooling over, into a land trust to protect it from exactly the kind of lawsuit happy world he distrusted. The Marina's street address sits on the storage parcel. Kyle copied the legal description off the tax bill without ever ordering a full title history. Because due diligence was always someone else's job in his world, he committed 5 federal felonies to steal a gravel lot. He was selling Lake Crest, a shoreline he never touched. The con man's entire empire was pole barns. Which left me one last piece of business, and it was the hardest one, because it required me to act against every instinct I've sharpened for 66 years. My whole life, I protected people by controlling what they knew. I did it to my daughter for 6 weeks during this case. And it nearly cost me her. And I could feel the old pull: wrap up the trust, keep its contents quiet, carry the family's weight alone the way I always had. Instead, on a Sunday in September, I sat Lauren down at my kitchen table and spread out every document Jean ever filed. The land trust, the waterfront parcels, the appraisals she'd never seen, with numbers that made her set down her coffee. Everything her father built, everything I'd guarded, everything that was hers to know and one day hers to hold. She read for a long time. Then she looked up and asked why I was showing her now, after a lifetime of locked file cabinets. Because, I told her, I spent 29 years learning how liars operate, and the one thing every con needs to survive is a family that doesn't talk to each other. I'm done being the easiest thing for a criminal to work around. We repainted the Marina sign together in October, before the first hard frost. Doyle's Landing, same as always, but underneath, smaller. Her idea and her brushwork, Doyle. He just picked the one family on this lake where reading the paperwork is the family business. He wanted our waterfront. He ended up with federal time over a gravel lot. And me, I ended up with the only asset on this shoreline that was ever actually worth stealing. She signs her own name now. I taught her that. It's the best thing I ever put on paper.